At some point in this video, I'm going to tell you how you can win a GK2 for yourself. No way! You're not going to believe this. Uniformation have given us a printer that I can give away to one of you. But before I can tell you more about that, let's get started making the basis for these Ninja Turtles. By the way, this is a full series of Ninja Turtle making videos that will cover the entire 4 of the Ninja Turtles in the next 4 videos. I'm going to be painting the Ninja Turtles, which was sculpted by Zez and is part of their Patreon at the moment and ongoing throughout all of May. I'm going to be painting this entire collection. There is 2 more to come, and hopefully you will enjoy and join me on my journey of my first series on YouTube. Now, I realize that we probably shouldn't do a singular video for each and every single Ninja Turtle, and so in this video I'm going to concentrate on their bases, and I'm going to show you some of the tricks that I use to get these bases up to scratch, and then in a later video we'll start working on the 2 turtles themselves, and so on and so forth. But first, let's talk about the quality of the sculpts that we are actually looking at. And hopefully you can tell these things are superbly packed with detail. There is some little bit of working that we need to do to just make it fit our printers. But other than that, these things have so much detail. It is absolutely epic. I can't wait to paint these. And speaking of detail, there's no point in having detail if you don't have the printer to go and print that detail with. And for me, that 3D printer has been the Uniformation GK2. This is one of the most reliable machines that I currently have in my fleet. Now, it's no secret that my favorite machine, especially of the last year or so, has been the Uniformation GK2. This machine is absolutely incredible, and one of the main reasons for this was particularly the inbuilt heater that is in the bottom of the vat of this printer. A couple of more interesting things about the machine, however, is that it is a 10.3-inch screen, if that means anything to you about sizes and stuff like that. But more importantly to me is the XY resolution, which is 29.6 microns, which is really small. It's not the smallest on the market, but it is so small that you're going to have absolutely beautifully crispy prints pretty much almost every time. It has this gorgeous flip up lid, which is so easy to use. It has a quick release build plate, as well as the vat doesn't need any screws to come out. With all those features, as well as the 8K screen and the air purifying via a charcoal block in the back of the friggin' printer, it's amazing. This is one of my best printers that I currently own, and I honestly can rely on this machine every time to produce absolutely high quality models without failure. Well, to be fair, you're gonna fail if you do anything silly, but realistically, if you have set up your prints to be printed fine, this machine will win every time. With all this in mind, I've managed to convince Uniformation to give us one, and what I mean by that is that I've convinced them to give away one for free. And how you're gonna get that is by leaving some comments in the little square box down below telling me why you need one of these, and I will pick one at random and I will announce that in the final video that goes out on the 30th of May. While I am editing this, I am realizing that there is a lot of terrible people on the internet. I will not message you at all about winning a competition. I will not ask you for your details. I will not ever message you. I will not message you. So if someone messages you claiming that they're me and you've won anything, don't answer it. Delete, block them, and save yourself from being scammed. Please do not get scammed to try and win a printer or anything on the internet. The only way you're going to know is if I announce your name in the final video, and if you don't contact me after that, I'll give it to someone else. I want to show you something that has totally helped my entire modeling experience, particularly because I sometimes work on a lot of stuff all at the same time, and so it's these little baking tray things that you can get at the pound store or the dollar store or whatever it is. They're literally like £1 each, so they cost like next to nothing, but they're really good for separating things out and carrying things around, as well as in my case I will put my paints when I'm done with them onto one of those very nicely so that I know what I'm working with, but I also am able to share that with my Patreons. Quick little plug there for my Patreon. If you want to see the color palettes for each model and video, there will be a picture of that on the Patreon, link in description, check in description. For now I'm going to separate these models into 2 bits and get ready to put them together. So now that I have it all separated, I have the models at least separated into their 2 trays. This is Raphael and this is Leonardo in his own tray. It is time for me to make these things not to be pieces, because pieces is not what I want. A complete model is what I need. One of the unfortunate byproducts of 3D printing things in bits is that there's always going to be a very tiny gap. Even if you do print it really well and you have minimal shrinkage and everything, you're still going to have some form of a gap. We're not all gods and we cannot all print perfectly, and if your supporting isn't very good, then you might have even bigger gaps than these. So this is the time when we need to know how to fill these gaps, and I've done videos on this before, but we'll briefly touch it in this video, and maybe this will help you in filling your gaps. Also, you will note that I've printed some of these glass features that go into this window in a clear resin, and this will be painted to be clear, which is going to then be clear. Now I've already done a brief sanding over all the edges and trying to get most of the support marks off, so this has essentially been sanded. That is why there is a lot of dust still on it, so I need to clean this off, and I'm going to use a toothbrush and some alcohol and a little bit of elbow grease to get that stuff off of the models, and then when I'm done with that I can start gluing things together, and yeah. Actually, that's a lie. I'm going to glue things together now and then I'm going to clean them. This is an overfilled plastic cup full of standard resin, and this is a UV light. Any type of UV light, as long as it is a 405 nanometers wavelength, as long as it's the one that cures resin, 405, whatever it is. Basically, what you're going to do is you're going to dip an old paintbrush into this stuff, and you're going to overfill all these gaps with the resin and cure it as you go along. Don't forget to harden up that little cap before you throw it away. Now it's time to go back in and sand off the raised edges that you have made, thus forth, hence giving you a flat edge and no longer a little gap in your model, which is fantastic. Sometimes sandpaper just doesn't seem to work and you might need to use a tool. Once that's all done, it's time for me to give it a lovely coat of Chaos Black, mostly because I sell this in my shop, but also because I need to start out from black on these pieces. Okay, so now I have got them pretty much all the holes covered up, and they're basically been primed and ready to be painted. Next step is obviously to put some paint on. I haven't quite thought about how I'm going to do this yet, but from what I see in the reference image, it looks like they are a reddish brick with like a black greyish kind of color surrounding. I don't really know the words for these things either, but I'm going to try to replicate what it looks like in the reference images, and let's see what ends up happening. I'm going to be using red leather from Vallejo, and I'm going to put that into my airbrush and spray that pretty much over all the bricks. What I'm doing though is not spraying this as one solid color. What you can see is that I'm leaving some areas of black to shine through that color that I've laid down. I will darken this a little bit in some of those areas that I left black by using some Reichland Flesh Shade, and this is going to create some tones over the top of that so the bricks are not all the exact same color. And now to tint the bricks to the reddish color that I actually really want, I'm going to take Carabao Crimson and I'm going to spray this over pretty much most of them. I'm not covering them though. I'm also again using this to help create some variation across the flat piece of the brick area. I then need to paint back the black over the top of the things that got covered when I was painting those bricks. That's going to be the pipes and a little bit of the stone work, cement stuff around the edge. Now, in order to get the color that I want out of this stoneworky edging friggin' stuff around the edge, I'm going to take a gray and I'm going to spray that, again, volumetrically or periodically, whatever word you want to use to describe it, but I'm not spraying it solid. A little bit of overspray with this stuff onto the bricks is not a bad thing. Remember, the bricks need to be a variation of colors, so a bit of overspray isn't going to kill anything, but what you want to try and do is just to really get that paint to get some shades and highlights all across the entire model. If you paint it one flat color, you've just made it flat, and it's going to be harder to bring this to life later on. I'm then going to go back into those areas that I left a lot of the black into, and I'm going to use a blue wash to not make it black, because if it's black, black is a boring color. Making it a little bit blue is going to make it seem not boring. And just to add a little bit more depth to this base coat, I'm going to take one of my wife's makeup brushes and I'm going to just gently dry brush some grey over the edges so that the edges have a nice harsh line. I'm going to say that we're now at a pretty decent point to start adding a little bit more detail on top of these bases. I have got now what I would call a nice base layer on the bases. So I've said the word bases too many times. Let's start adding some dry brushing over the top of this. Also, on this base, there is some graffiti which I'm going to need to put in place on this model, and I'm going to be doing that, but I'm only going to deal with that once I've got all the bottom layers done first. That graffiti looks really cool, and I think it's a necessity. It was about at this point that I realized my other dry brushing brushes were literally trash, and it's time for me to go get some new ones. Now, if you didn't know this already, you can buy specifically made for dry brushing paintbrushes from the model store. However, my pocket prefers for me to go to the Superdrug shop and just buy makeup brushes because I can get a whole lot more for my money that way. I'm going to take these very nice brand new makeup brushes, which are super epically awesome when they're new, and I'm going to very carefully start to build up the edges a little bit more than what I had previously done with the first dry brush. Using a smaller dry brush enables you to get into a lot sharper of an edge than using the big one. The big one tends to make things a little bit dusty, and with the small one you can be more precise and really capture the edges that you want to pull out. Another really good use for dry brushing is when you're doing metallics. A very good thing to do is just paint it black, specifically silvers and stuff, and you can then dry brush the silver or the dark silver and a mixture of the light silver over the top of that, making it look like this object is actually metallic. And whilst I have the metal paints out, it reminded me that I needed to paint the panes of these windows. So I started out by painting them with a black. I'm just using a contrast paint for ease of the fact that it's in the bottle right in front of me and I don't have to put my wet palette out just yet. I'm going to carry on with some more of the dry brushing of the silver bits, and then I'm going to come back with some of this dirty down moss stuff, and I'm going to airbrush it. I've never actually seen if anyone has airbrushed it before, but I'm going to airbrush it, and I actually really like how it came out. Now, there is some red handles on some of these tap things, and so I painted them red. So just a little something that I noticed on this base that I potentially got wrong. There's this little line of bricks that goes down the side there, that is definitely the same color as the rest of the building, so I'm going to paint that black and then dry brush it and get it to look... there are some bits of metal sticking out of the rubbly pieces of the buildings, and I'm pretty sure these are pieces of rebar, and I'm also pretty sure they're not the color that I painted them. However, there was way too much of the same color going on, and so I decided to introduce a slightly different color to those rebar pieces, whether it is accurate or not. I also took the metallic paints, do you remember? I remembered that earlier, and I then painted that around the panes of the glasses, and also I used a little bit of Talisar blue mixed 50-50 with water, and I sprayed that very carefully, mostly just on the cracked edges of the glass itself. It's not very noticeable, but it's a very small detail that I feel is necessary. I then gloss coated them and put them aside to dry while I started to work on the chimneys. And for the chimneys I did the same thing pretty much as I did for the pipes around the bases, and I dry brushed over the top of black with a dark silver, then sprayed a little bit of blue into the shadows because black is a boring color, and used black, which is again a boring color, to go back into the crevasses very carefully with a panel line wash. Once I was done with that, I glued them into place, and it was time for me to start adding a bit more depth onto those little rebar things now that they are dry. And for this, I literally just did a wash over the top of them and left it at that. I then glued the windows into the building and sat back to admire my work. Now if you're feeling a little bit extra spicy and you perhaps miss some of the times you had as a youth, maybe you can draw on these walls using these Posca pens. I found that there are two different sizes of Posca pens, which essentially are these markers that can draw on almost anything, and they're really bright and bold. They're water-based but permanent. As long as they dry, then they will stay there forever, and pretty good for doing hobbies, stuff like we do. Basically, I found a set. They're very expensive. It hurt a lot to purchase these, but I purchased the smallest set that I could possibly think of affording, and unfortunately I didn't have all the colors I needed, but it managed to work out okay in the end. So what I did was I roughly drew on where I wanted the graffiti to go, and yes, I went straight balls to the wall, no pun intended, and I just painted it directly on. And by painting, what I mean is drawing it directly on. I also used a felt tip marker with black to make sure that I can get the black edges nice and crispy clean, and this is a really easy way to do graffiti. At this point as well, I decided I needed to add a little bit more variation onto the base, and so I painted some of the bricks with a darker wash. On the other base, I wanted to add Raph's name in the graffiti, and this one, I literally just drew it out, free-handed, balls to the wall. I ain't scared. This is a thing I used to do. I'm not gonna say that I did actually do it, but let's just say I have some practice in doing this. I also sprayed some washes over the top of them, just so that they weren't so bright and stark and bright like it was neon paint or something, and moved on to the little power box bank thing, whatever it is, that is underneath Leo's base, and I painted that with a dry brush of silver at first to make it look metallic, and then I used contrast red to paint over some of the reddish areas on it, and then using deck tan to paint the areas before they were going to go yellow, I then painted them yellow using Imperial Fist yellow. I took some contrast paint and sprayed that through my airbrush at the switches, and when I was done with that, I went around and painted bright silver on all the little screws and bolts and things that pretty much hold this together. I also used a black contrast paint to paint the little knobs, and then painted the little logo of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with a red and a green, and then I stuck that into its place on Leo's base, and that's where I called these bases done. With vibrant spray, Ninja Turtles on wheels, ready to play. Set studios crafting the finest sculpts in town. But for now, just painting the faces down, rolling through the concrete jungle. This was obviously a very long video, and if you've made it this far, thank you so much. Of course, now you should go down to the bottom in the little square box and leave some words, leave a like, and if you haven't already, click the subscribe button. And if you want to support the channel, then check out my Patreon, as well as check out the sponsor of this video's Patreon, that is Zez Studios. Also, please check out Uniformation. There is a link for everything in the description. I want to say a special thank you to my Patreons for their support right meow. Also, if you found anything in this video that you didn't like, I really don't care. And now is a good time for you to f*** off. Although, I'm going to be totally honest, you probably should have done that in the first few seconds. But if you made it this far, then at least you got to hear me telling you to f*** off.